Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today, we're going to be breaking down 5 Steelers players that I could see get traded either before or during the 2025 NFL season this year. Before we get into it today, predict it for me down there in the comment section. Will the Steelers be buyers or sellers once we get to the NFL trade deadline midway through the 2025 NFL season? Give me a B if you think they're going to be buyers, or type S if you think they're going to be sellers to kick off today's show. So before we get into it today, I want you guys to keep in mind, most of the players that are on today's list, I think, have no chance of being traded during the offseason. I think they're only viable to be traded at the trade deadline if the Steelers are selling. Okay, so just keep that in mind once we get into the later portions of today's list. But there is one guy that I could see the Pittsburgh Steelers trade before the start of the season. All right, and this would not be something that I would be in favor for, and I think it would absolutely suck if the Pittsburgh Steelers traded this guy before the season, and it's George Pickens. I want Pickens to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, at least for one more season, to see how he does with DK Metcalf and see if he can, develop and grow as a person and as a player and as a professional here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do not want to trade him. I want to make that abundantly clear because it seems like every time I talk about even the possibility of Pickens getting traded, I get blasted in the comments for saying, why do you want to trade Pickens? I don't. I just want to acknowledge the reality that the Steelers have been sniffing around potential trade possibilities. And I think that especially if things get hairy with Pickens' contract negotiations this offseason, things might go sour very, very fast. Now, you take a look at Pickens' profile here. There was a report from Bleach Report's James Palmer that claims that Pickens and Pittsburgh's relationship, quote, has not gone well, unquote, behind the scenes. There's other reporting saying that Pickens has a strong relationship with Mike Tomlin, by the way, so it kind of depends on which reports you believe out there. But I do not believe that the Pittsburgh Steelers will give Pickens a contract extension this offseason. If he has a great season this year, if he proves himself as a consummate professional, and he has a great season statistically, I do think they will consider paying him next offseason, but I do not foresee them giving him a big contract extension here in 2025. And if he demands that extension, which is definitely not impossible, I could see the situation getting very ugly, where I could see Pickens saying, you pay me my extension, you pay me my money, or I'm not playing for you guys this year, or you guys can trade me. All right, and I think in that scenario, if he's forcing their hand like that, the Steelers would probably prefer to trade him if that's what ends up happening. Now, the scary part of that is I don't think Pittsburgh can afford to lose him, especially if they don't get a suitable replacement to be the number 2 receiver here in Pittsburgh. We saw last year what happened when you had a legit number 1 receiver, but you didn't have a legit number 2 guy to take attention off the number 1. And if you take George Pickens out of here, it's like I love DK Metcalf, and I like Calvin Austin III as a 3rd receiver, Roman Wilson as another potential 3rd receiver. But I don't know. I think we saw this movie play out last year, guys, and it didn't work out all too well with just one legit wide receiver at the X position. All right. So if Pittsburgh has to trade George Pickens, or if they feel like they have to trade him, I think they need to get a wide receiver back. Not only do they need to get the best possible draft pick that they can back in exchange for him, but they also need to get a wide receiver to add to this wide receiver room to help them out. Some potential landing spots here on some potential replacements on those potential destinations for George Pickens. The New York Giants, Darius Slayton was a player that the Steelers were looking at the trade deadline last year. Big-time downfield threat. Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys were very heavily linked to the Steelers during the George Pickens kind of hoopla during the draft. Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Marquez Valdez-Scantling of Seattle. If Seattle wanted to upgrade their X position, Valdez-Scantling has played with Aaron Rodgers before, so keep that one in mind. The Steelers were very much in on Adam Thielen at the trade deadline last year. The price was too high for him, though. And then Alan Lazard is another somebody that has played with Aaron Rodgers in the past that maybe the Jets would want to add a big-time talent like George Pickens. Now, I think that the 2 most likely destinations, if a trade does happen, and again, I'll reiterate, I don't want a trade to happen, but Dallas is definitely a team that was connected to the Pittsburgh Steelers in trade talks for George Pickens. And then I actually think the New York Giants might be another team that might consider it as well. You take a look here at the Giants profile. I think that Pickkins really fits what Brian Daboll wants to do in attacking down the field. He's a great downfield threat, as we know. Also, Russell Wilson, their new starting quarterback, will 100% push and pound the table for Pickens to be a New York Giant if he's made available. And then finally, Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, they know this is the year that they got to win, and they got to get this team at least in consideration for the postseason if they want to save their jobs, all right? So they might be willing to take a little bit more of a character risk in George Pickens here. So I certainly see that fit. And then with the Dallas Cowboys, obviously they were the team most heavily linked to Pickens in pre-draft kind of trade talks for the receiver. And, the Cowboys have certainly been a team that's not afraid to trade for receivers and take on some character risks from time to time. And, they have been willing to pay more than other teams in trades in the past. So it's very possible that these two teams are potential options for the Pittsburgh Steelers if push comes to shove this offseason. But obviously, again, I'll reiterate, ideally, George Pickens is playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025. The only way I see the Steelers trading him is if they get to a point where they literally have to trade him, or else they're just going to, eat his contract for a year. I just don't see that happening. So we'll see what happens, but I would love to see what DK Metcalf and George Pickens could do in this offense, especially with Aaron Rodgers throwing them the football. So hopefully this whole contract situation doesn't get too hairy this offseason. So let me know, true or false, down there in the comment section. Pickens will be a Steeler after the trade deadline this year. Type true or type false for me down there in the comment section for today's pinned question. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a few moments. When that happens, take advantage of that time by letting me know if you think Pickens will be a Steeler 2 seasons from now. All right, now let's get into another potential trade candidate, and this is another one that I don't think is going to happen, but I do acknowledge the possibility that if push comes to shove, it could happen, and that's T.J. Watt. And you guys know how I feel about T.J. Watt. I think he's the most valuable defensive player in all of football, and he's the most valuable player on the entire Steelers roster. So this is another one. Trust me, I don't want them to do, all right? But and if you guys want to see just how much I think T.J. Watt is and how valuable he is to the Steelers roster and to the team, I did a whole video of why the Steelers should pay up for him this offseason. If you want to check that out, I'll put the link to that one in the comments and description of today's show. But, I do see a path for the Pittsburgh Steelers to potentially trade T.J. Watt at the trade deadline. The first step is Pittsburgh isn't competitive. Aaron Rodgers comes here. He's not very good. The offensive line sucks. The team isn't winning football games, and they're kind of out of playoff contention. Number 2 thing that needs to happen, T.J. Watt needs to be demanding $40+ million per season or some sort of figure the Steelers are not willing to pay. And then the final thing is somebody offers an absolute haul of draft picks for him. All right, if those kind of 4 things happen, I think that the Steelers might consider it. But honestly, I think the Steelers are going to be competitive. I think they're going to be buyers at the NFL trade deadline, so we don't even have to really worry about this. And my guess is I think that an extension gets done before the season even begins. We saw last year Cam Hayward and Pat Freiermuth's deals got done just before the season began, and I think it's going to be a very similar situation here between T.J. Watt and the Steelers, where Watt's going to want $40+ million per season. He might even want to be the highest paid non-quarterback in football history. And he's not going to budge off that number, and the Steelers are going to spend all offseason trying to get him off that number, and then at the last second, they're going to kind of cave, and they're going to give him the number that he feels that he deserves. Now, coming up here, I got 3 more trade candidates, 3 more players that I could see the Steelers trading at the trade deadline if they end up not being competitive and they end up selling this year. But before we get into that, let's have a word from our sponsor here at Fanatics. And somebody that's not going to get traded at the trade deadline this year is DK Metcalf. So if you guys want to make a little bit of an investment in a player's jersey that's going to be around for a while here, you can go to chatsports.com/DK. That also helps us out here at Steelers Talk because Fanatics sends us part of the proceeds of every single purchase that you guys make. So if you want to help us out a little bit financially and get yourself a brand new DK Metcalf jersey, today's your chance. Go to chatsports.com/DK. I'll put the link to that one in the comments and description of today's show. Another player that if the Steelers are losing and they're not competitive, and there's a team out there willing to give a pretty decent draft pick for Jaylen Warren, depending on how Warren's playing during the year and what the Steelers' future plans are for him, he is expected to be a free agent in 2026. And if they feel like Caleb Johnson is the guy that is going to be for the future, and they don't really see Jaylen Warren being worth a bigger contract on the open market the next year, I could see them trading Jaylen for like an early day 3 draft pick if somebody is willing to pay that price. Now, I love Jaylen Warren. If you guys have been watching the channel, you guys know I think he's an awesome player. And like I said about Watt, I think the Steelers will be buying at the trade deadline, so I don't think you need to worry about this too much. But in the event the Steelers are not competitive and they are selling, I do think Warren will be one of those players that for the right price, the Steelers would be willing to let go of. Then you get to Calvin Austin III, another player here. I think that they like him a lot. Speed demon, really good with the ball in his hands. Good, underrated route runner. Really, really good route runner for kind of how people view him. And I actually think he's better on the outside than he is in the slot. Another misconception about him. Made some tough catches for the Steelers last year down the stretch. But if a team is looking for like a legit speed demon type of number 3 receiver at the trade deadline, and again, the Steelers are not competitive, I do think Calvin is somebody that could be dealt. And then Isaac Seumalo entering a year where I think that if the Steelers are not playing well, perhaps the Steelers could think about letting him go next year because he is, or this year I should say, at the trade deadline, because he is slated to be a free agent in 2026. So if the Steelers aren't competitive and they don't really see Seumalo as a long-term starter down the road for this team, certainly wouldn't count out the Steelers letting go of Seumalo for a day 3 pick. That'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. We talked about trade candidates today, where honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I don't think any of these guys get traded. So that's a good news if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. But if you made it to the end of today's show, type those real ones down there in the comments section. I greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. Click that subscribe button if you want more Steelers videos like this one every single day. Until next time, guys. Here we go, Steelers.